Okay, good morning, everybody. Today is 2/22/22. A lot of twos today. And good morning. This is the Senate Transportation Committee. And we're going to discuss a little bit about recycling this morning. Uh, and Anthea is with us this morning. And I think Senator Perchick, is this some of the language that you put together, or
Yes, based,
why don't you explain to us what it is? Then we can go from there. Thank you.
yeah, we had in the committee, we had heard about the efforts to try to increase the use of recycled materials, particularly glass as a base material. And we heard from AOT and others. So I thought it seemed like there was support of moving in this direction. So I thought, since we have the time, maybe come up with some language that just puts it down in writing, that we encourage AOT to go along the lines they're already going on, but just kind of puts it out there on kind of what the goal is. So I worked with Anthea on creating that. I sent it to AOT. They haven't had a lot of time. I sent it to them Friday, so they didn't have a lot of time to look at it. And then also reached out to Cassell and Miss Crosby just to see if it was kind of in line with what people were thinking the state should do and what we wanted to do.
Good thinking. We should be thinking about that. Well, so who would like to run through the language that you worked with Anthea? Does she want to go through the language for us, or you, or?
He is here. Yeah, if Anthea is willing to do it, that'd be great.
Okay.
Sure.
Yep. Anthea, good morning.
Good morning. So for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel, an attorney, not an engineer. So you're going to want to hear from your engineers on this. I'm going to put up the share screen. And while I'm doing that, I'm just going to give the 30-second version of what a concrete mix design is, because I think it's helpful information to have when you're going through the rest of this. But again, I am an attorney. You're going to want to hear from the engineers that actually, work in this field. And I have to give credit to my husband, who's an engineer, who helped me simplify my 30-second pitch on what is concrete mix design. So concrete mix design, this is going to be aggregates, a hydraulic mortar, and water. So aggregates are going to be rocks, gravel, sand, other materials, potentially recycled materials that take up space. Your hydraulic mortar is going to be cement, which is probably going to be Portland cement, and pozzolans, which can be a partial but not a complete substitute for Portland cement. For members of the committee who were here last biennium, there was language that was added into the 2021 T-bill, and you'll see it referenced in one of the findings of fact, that had to do with encouraging the agency to continue, when possible, to use pozzolans as a substitute for Portland cement. So this is sort of building off of that. So with that little mini background on concrete mix design, that sort of has bearing on why there are all of these findings. And these findings would just be specific for this section. And they are really looking at the use of recycled materials as substitutes for those two non-water components of the concrete mix design, the aggregate and the hydraulic mortar. So your findings. The General Assembly finds that with the passage of the Universal Recycling Law, the state of Vermont committed to providing convenient and efficient recycling services to all Vermonters. Efficient recycling systems save energy, conserve natural resources, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Recycled glass aggregate can serve as a substitute for virgin or manufactured sand. So that's an example of a recycled material being used as that first component. Mining sand is a practice that is known to have an adverse effect on the environment. Recycled glass can be ground and used as a pozzolan. That's that second piece, the hydraulic mortar, which can be a partial substitute for Portland cement in a concrete mix design or converted into a building component. 6, fly ash, which is a pozzolan, is the byproduct of the burning of coal, and ground granulated blast furnace slag, which is also a pozzolan, is the byproduct of steel manufacturing. This is the act that I referred to earlier. The Agency of Transportation is already, pursuant to 2021 Acts and Resolves number 121, section 21, encouraged to, wherever practicable, use pozzolans and alternatives to Portland cement as part of the concrete mix design for all transportation infrastructure projects. 8, reusing recycled glass as a substitute for virgin or manufactured sand conserves natural resources by reducing the need to mine or manufacture sand. Using materials recycled in Vermont as a partial substitute for aggregate and non-aggregate components in maintenance, construction, and improvement projects could reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the state's carbon footprint by eliminating the need to transport recycled glass out of the state for further processing. 10, almost done, using materials recycled in Vermont as a partial substitute for aggregate and non-aggregate components in maintenance, construction, and improvement projects could provide an economic benefit to the local recycling industry. And then 1, to just sort of be a catch-all for the fact that this is changing, technology is advancing. There will continue to be advances in the availability and use of sustainable components, such as recycled materials and manufacturing byproducts in maintenance, construction, and improvement projects. So those are your findings. Now let's get to the actual substance of the section. Subsection B, this is the goal. It's saying that it should be a goal of the Agency of Transportation that recycled materials and manufacturing byproducts that can be processed into an aggregate or non-aggregate component of a concrete mix design or any other building component shall be utilized in maintenance, construction, and improvement projects within the state's transportation program to the greatest extent possible. So these are going to be things within the transportation program, that white binder, what's adopted through the T-bill. Then there's subsection C having to do with contractors. This is sort of extending that goal downward to contractors that the agency is working with. It says that any state contract awarded for those maintenance, construction, or improvement projects within the transportation program, so again, keeping it to the white book that's adopted through the T-bill, shall provide that recycled materials and manufacturing byproducts that can be processed into an aggregate or non-aggregate component of a concrete mix design or another building component shall be utilized to the greatest extent possible. So completely duplicating what the agency goal is in subsection B. Subsection D is on the policy. It's asking the agent or telling the Agency of Transportation to develop 1 or more policies on the use of recycled and byproduct materials. It's requiring that that is done not later than January 15th of 2023. It's also requiring in subdivision 2 that that policy or policies be filed with the House and Senate Committees on Transportation. And then subsection E is your tracking and report. It's requiring the agency to annually track the use of the recycled materials and manufacturing byproducts in those projects, the maintenance, construction, and improvement projects. And then it is requiring a report back to the House and Senate Committees on Transportation in January of each year. It's not a written report, it's an oral report. So it would be just, potentially something that's covered by them coming in and testifying. And that is the end of the section. I will take down my screen share. Happy to answer questions, but I think I am not the best suited person to answer them.
Okay, there's a lot there. Yes, good job laying it out. Senator Perchick, would you like to offer some discussion?
No, I think that, as usual, Anthony did a great job of laying out the findings of why we're doing it and just setting this goal. Nick and from AOT are here to talk about it, but then we also have Crosby from Casella to talk about it. Like, I don't know if the agenda has one of them.
Who would like to go next? You want Casella or AOT? You want to go last or?
I can go. I don't have a lot to add.
Okay, good morning.
Go first.
Sure, go right
ahead. Morning. Just for the record, my name is Kim Crosby with Casella. I have had a chance to review the proposed language in draft 3.1 regarding use of recycled and byproduct materials. We were really excited to see the inclusion of the use of recycled glass as a pozzolan in place of fly ash. Based on some of our research that we've done, we believe that in addition to PGA, this is one of the best options we've seen for glass processed through material recovery facilities in a long time. And more importantly, this would reduce the reliance of using fly ash as a byproduct from coal-fired power plants that is known to cause negative effects on human health and the environment.
What is fly ash? Is that, help me out.
Yeah, it's maybe Ann and Nick can answer it better than me, but it is a residue almost from like a byproduct from a coal-fired power plant.
Oh,
so it's kind of like the ash that's left over, and then they're using that as a pozzolan mix.
Do we have coal-fired facilities in Vermont? A lot of them, or
we have a
Not
small
that I
one
know
in Danville.
Yeah.
do we? Oh no, at our house, yeah, the kitchen, Senator Kitchell's cellar. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I could sell it, right.
No, seriously, do we have any facilities that produce coal ash?
I don't think we do. I think it might be imported.
I
I'm
don't
not
think in
sure.
Vermont.
The
Yeah.
closest coal
We
plant
don't have a
to Vermont
coal-fired
'Cause I
plant.
know we have a wood chip plant, Burlington there, the
A couple.
wood plant. What do they do with all that ash?
I don't know.
Oh,
There is a coal plant in New Hampshire that still runs sometime in Bow, New Hampshire. That's the closest one.
oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Kim. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So we're supportive of the goals outlined in the draft and the tracking and reporting requirements. I think this is a great step forward in creating local markets for Vermont's glass. And I think it's important to recognize, which this draft certainly does, that recycling isn't just about keeping materials out of the landfill or recycling a product back into its original intended use, but it's also about conserving our natural resources. And that's all I really had to add at this time, unless anyone has any specific questions for me.
Well, your company certainly does a lot of recycling. That's
Yes,
I
we
guess you
do.
Oh,
And
yeah,
there's
so you're into it big time statewide.
Yeah, and as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we're certainly looking for local markets for glass. It's really important to us to
Yeah. Huh.
pursue that.
Interesting.
And I really like to appreciate the work that V-Trans has done in support of this effort. They've been a great partner in this project, and Senator Perchick for putting this
Yeah,
language
there's a lot-
together.
There's a lot of issues, but at least we're looking at them and talking about them.
Right.
Anybody else from the recycling before we go to AOT?
Senator Mazza.
Yes, go right ahead, Senator Burke.
So Kim, and maybe you're not the one to answer this question, but all these products that we're investigating mixing into aggregate or concrete or any finished product, have they been used elsewhere? I mean, I'm concerned about finding out years later is what we did with, and I don't even know the history of it, but the Chinese sheetrock that we had come in that was just horrible stuff that was actually safety related problems. And then the buildings that we had in Florida with the concrete mixtures that they had down there that were collapsing, and the fly ash has been a problem with concrete as far as finishing floors and stuff like that. Or do we have histories of successful uses of mixing in these products?
I think that might be better answered by V-Trans, but I think there have been some research studies done on that. And maybe there were issues at first, but I think that there has been some improvements made.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in on that one, if I may. For the record, my name is Nick VanDenberg, and I lead the materials testing and certification section here within the Agency of Transportation. So yes, as far as the different materials being incorporated into concrete or other building materials, you bring up a good point, Senator Ingles, with regard to ensuring that they're used appropriately and that the safety is ensured. And so that's one area where, as far as ensuring that they're suitable for the application, we really like to craft our specifications such that they're performance related and allows us to leverage the experience and the expertise that our contractors and material producers in the region have with these materials. So the approach that we've been taking from the agency perspective is to vet these materials and these applications ahead of time, but then craft our specifications such that we allow their use. And in so doing, we allow the contractors and material producers to find the right mixtures and the right applications to use them most appropriately, and ultimately to ensure that it's improving the outcome for that material and that application.
Okay, the agency would like to take over now for your testimony. Who is here from the agency?
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Ann.
Hi. For the record, my name is Ann Gengel. I'm the Agency of Transportation's Chief Engineer. And if I could just speak just for a moment to this, the agency has been asked to comment on the proposed language termed use of recycled and byproduct materials. We just got a chance to see it, I think, late on Friday, so we haven't fully digested it yet. But I just wanted to say that our agency has been working for several years now with a team that's made up of the Agency of Natural Resources, some industry partners, including the Vermont Associated General Contractors, and several recycled materials suppliers on the use of various recycled materials in transportation construction projects. We are committed to encouraging our contractors to use recycled materials to achieve quality projects through the performance of their work. We do this through standard specifications and quality assurance practices that align with our federal highway guidance. We do support this bill, the language, but we do have some concerns with some of the terms that are used. And if we have an opportunity, we would like to work with the committee and Anthea on some suggested changes, perhaps. We have a little bit of a concern with the use of the term policy, establishing a policy, because we are concerned that it conflicts with how we establish specifications, material specifications that are done in accordance with our federal highway guidance. So we would like to tweak some of that just a little bit there. And as Nick said, he can go into some more detail on the specifics if you would like to hear some of the specifics on the language itself.
Good, yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of information in this, but it's a start. We'll certainly work our way through it, but it's an interesting subject. So go right ahead. And anything else you want to offer before we switch it, or any
My
questions
question,
related? Yes, go right ahead.
my question is, well, does the agency support the language then to be included?
I think there should be some tweaking probably, I think.
We would like to offer some suggested tweaks or
But
changes.
in concept,
In concept, we do, yes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes, go right ahead.
Ms. Gamble did send me their comments, and I think they're aligned with definitely what I work and definitely want to respect the engineers and the agency's work on this. And so I think we can make some changes. And my anticipation was that this is something that we would add to the T bill. So we have time to work on the language, obviously.
Yeah, I think there's some good thoughts here, and we could probably, with a little time, work our way through it. But I thought we'd at least get some rough ideas today of where we're going and how we get there. It is a big ask. We want to make sure that all parties have their involvement in it, because it is an important subject. We're all looking at how to recycle things. And, we all can agree on some parts. It would make some progress. So who would like to go next? Anything from the committee members at this point? I can't see everybody on the screen. Just jump right in if you Senator Kitchell, no? Yes, go right ahead.
no, my only comment is, aren't we fortunate that we had adjunct legislative council staff in the form of a spouse who's an engineer to have something written
Yeah.
that
Yeah, you can't-
brings
you
in
can't
that
stump her.
expertise. So
Stump out, yeah, you can't stump her.
I expect that was pro bono.
I hope so.
Yes. It was over
No,
coffee.
I'm sure, but you know,
You had to make supper.
it just shows how things get done here in Vermont. So
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
you should give him our thanks, Anthea.
Yeah.
I'll pass that along.
Mm.
Senator Chittenden, anybody? Yes, Senator Perchick, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Mr. VanDenberg is here to go over the language changes, but I don't know if we need to do that now. I could work with Anthea and the agency on their changes, and then we could present those later once we have them in the new draft.
Well, what's the committee's wishes? I don't know. Like I said, this is.
I think that makes sense to have us review the draft after it's these suggestions are incorporated.
Okay.
So I'll be in touch with Ann and Nick and Anthea.
Well, we thought this would be a lot more discussion. We allowed plenty of time for it, but I guess it's going to end pretty fast.
I'll just chime in on one thing then, Senator Mazza.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we cover the language, it doesn't much matter to me. I'm just glad we're moving this forward. I think it's really great that we're going to create local markets for this class, so we're not shipping it in pickup trucks all the way down to Massachusetts or even further, wearing down a road. So I fully support moving this forward, and I'm glad to see it coming together.
we're going to have a facility in South Burlington, so, you know, we're going to crush some glass there. Anything other members of the committee? Anybody else have anything to offer? Questions from anybody? Okay, well, I guess this was shorter than I thought. Yes, Senator Perchick.
I'll do have one question because I was just looking at the language that they sent. Did Ms. Gamble, did AOT have a concern about the reporting? I know I understood what you're saying about the policy, but I couldn't tell if you were striking that in the language you sent about just reporting verbally to the committee in the future.
Oh, well, we have an actual a suggestion. Instead of the reporting that's laid out in the language, because we have the recycled working group that meets regularly, we were wondering about using them in the work that they've been doing to report out to the committee verbally instead of following that. So that would be one of our suggestions in the language.
Okay. And is the agency tracking the use now? Like there was language in there about that the agency would track the use, but I assume you're doing that now, but I'm not sure.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be happy to jump in on that. So as far as that, the tracking and reporting language, actually from my perspective, the tracking language was perhaps more troubling. And I agree with Ann that I think a report from the recycled materials working group would give the committee a much more comprehensive understanding of the work that the agency is doing, you know, with our partners in A&R and industry around recycled materials as a whole. But the tracking, I guess, concerned me a little bit just because with some of those materials, the way they're incorporated makes tracking them pretty difficult. Like, for example, the processed glass aggregate, it's dumped with a dump truck and then it's mixed with a loader in a yard, and we allow up to 20% currently to be incorporated into certain materials. So just the reality is I think we would be imposing a requirement on our contractors and material producers to then say, okay, now if you're using these recycled materials, now you have the responsibility to track every bit of it that you're using and report it to the agency, so that way we can in turn report it. Whereas I think perhaps my concern is just that would discourage folks from using it, which obviously is the last thing that we want to do. You know, certainly other materials that are recycled, like recycled asphalt pavement, that one's easier to track because it goes across a weighbridge on its way into the mill, into the plant when it's being produced. So it would be easier said than done for certain materials, I think.
Okay. Yeah, we're happy to work with you on that. We don't want to create unnecessary paperwork.
Yes, Senator Ingles.
And I'm just going to go back to what I started the conversation with. I mean, I just think that it's just prudent to understand what these additions of these products to the, you know, these products we're talking about, you know, concrete. I mean, that is a end used product that is supposed to hang around for however length of time, 150 years. And I just want to be careful.
Even the Romans developed
absolutely, it. Absolutely. I just want to be careful that we're not throwing these products in just to meet a goal versus to make sure that they're going to be as stable as what they need to be. I think if we just take our time to make sure that that these products are mixing in there the way they're supposed to, and it doesn't affect the credibility of the product, is very important to me.
One of the things I noticed as we're going through that we have to be very cautious about is the word shall. And I hate when you say shall, that you're rushing things, and I want to make sure that it has ample time to go through the study and not mandate something upon a report that has to come up with something in a very short period of time. So I'd be very cautious about that. Kim, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to add that there's a company in Connecticut called Urban Mining, and they've been making they call it Positive, POZZOTIVE, and that's been fairly successful. If you wanted to look into their website.
Yeah, I think it's a good start. You just have to be careful what we mandate. Yeah. Nick, something else you want to add? Just go ahead.
If I may, yeah, I just wanted to agree with Senator Ingles and Senator Mazza as far as, again, making sure that the end product is what we expect it to be. And that's been another sort of philosophy or push from the agency, is to develop performance-related specifications. And whereas, those specifications really target the end performance of the material to ensure that we are going to have a long life, but we grant some freedom to the material producers to, again, leverage their expertise to choose what are the appropriate ingredients that will allow them to produce that long-lasting material. And also, Kim, you had mentioned the ground glass pozzolan, and that's an example where very recently we added that into our material specification, again, as it's on the menu for a concrete producer to use that now in developing their mix design. And again, as long as they can meet the performance targets that we set in our specifications, it's on the menu, and they have their freedom to use that and incorporate it in their materials.
Yes, Senator Kitchell.
Some of this conversation is a bit reminiscent of maybe past experiences and the extent to which we are doing the initial phase. And I think about some of the paving techniques that we tried, and we discovered that, and we were experimenting with different mixtures, and some of the options, in fact, did not have the durability and the success that was hoped for. So it's encouraging that we're going to benefit from somebody else's experience, because sometimes when we try something experimental, we discover that, in fact, it didn't yield what we wanted. And so I think this is sort of what we're, in my mind, getting at, is that we, as we're looking at the, whatever should be the right mix of say this ground glass recycled, is that there's a demonstrated evidence that gives us confidence that this is going to give us the long-term benefit. And I just, sometimes you do something experimental just because you want to have the benefit of seeing if that works. But for the purposes here, I guess we're saying we want to have the confidence and the benefit of somebody else's experience as we're formulating the right ratio or mix here.
And the problem is that we never find out it fails until 70, 80 years down the road. And who made those decisions? Well, we're not around anymore to live up to those. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that we're just not making decisions that are going to impact safety and other people's lives. And who was the damn fools that made those decisions back then that would have thought that this would work? And I think that we have the ability to just make sure that what we're going to mix into this product to stand the test of time, we have that ability to make sure that that it can work.
Nationwide, is this a practice that's happening across the country, or how is this working out in other states? Anybody?
Yeah, I can address that. So we, in our developing our specifications and from the Agency of Transportation, we always go first to using the national standards that have been developed. So for example, for processed glass aggregate, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, AASHTO, they publish material standards, specifications, and test methods for a wide variety of applications, but they have one that's, I believe it's M318 is the standard that pertains to processed glass aggregate. So we aren't proposing really to do anything that goes beyond what that nationally recognized standard already allows for. And those standards, of course, are developed with collaboration from all 50 DOTs as well as academia and industry. So certainly we're not proposing to do anything that's really setting any kind of precedent nationally or even regionally.
Okay. Anything else you want to add, Nick?
No, Senator.
Any questions? Anybody else? Okay, all right. I guess we'll have to get back together when we have some more information, and we'll continue our discussion at a later time. Thank you very much for showing up this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Jeannie, are we ready for the next item, or are we early?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, the
That's all
two
right.
witnesses are in the meeting. You can proceed.
We're ready. Okay, we can proceed. Okay. Next item this morning is policy agenda. Transportation for Vermont. And I don't know a lot about this subject, and we will turn it over to our guest this morning. And who's with us this morning? Who would like to go first? Tell us all about this.
I can go first.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having us. My name is Katie Gallagher, and I am the Sustainable Communities Program Director with Vermont Natural Resources Council. And as part of my work with Sustainable Communities, I help to coordinate the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which is what we are here to discuss today. And I have my colleague Rob Kidd from the Sierra Club with me as well. So we, I believe, have visited this committee in the past, probably a couple years ago now, but we really appreciate the chance to make this connection today and tell you about our policy priorities for this year. So I want to just start with a brief overview of who we are as a coalition, and then Rob and I will provide just a brief outline of our policy priorities. We had emailed a copy of our policy agenda document, which provides our recommendations in greater detail. So we won't go into all of that detail today, and then hopefully have some time at the end for any questions that committee members might have.
Okay, go right ahead.
So just a little bit about Transportation for Vermonters. We are a cross-sector advocacy organization with the goal of creating and promoting a sustainable and equitably accessible transportation system for a rural state, recognizing that we have certain challenges here in the transportation system. We currently have 13 member organizations. This is AARP Vermont, CarShare, CATMA, Green Mountain Transit, Local Motion, Renewable Energy Vermont, Sierra Club, Vermont Clean Cities Coalition, Vermont Environmental Education Program, VEIC, Vermont Natural Resources Council, Vermont Public Interest Research Group, and Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. And we also have many affiliates who help to advise us on policy and contribute to these conversations. And these range from the Vermont Center for Independent Living, Vermont Council on Rural Development, Capstone Community Action. So just wanted to kind of touch on all of these partners, as I think that the diversity of this group starts to give you a sense of how we think about transportation, which is, you know, this broad network with all of these different economic and fiscal and environmental and social benefits. So this group formed a couple years ago now, because even though we've made a lot of progress as a state, we still are falling short on a number of areas related to transportation. So just to touch on a couple, in terms of affordability, we know that transportation is the second largest household expense after housing, which of course is incredibly unaffordable. In terms of access, people without cars are hard pressed to access jobs, medical care, social activities, which, you know, during COVID, I think was really highlighted how important that social connectedness is for our community members. And in terms of energy, for example, 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation, which we know is the largest source of emissions in our state. So as a coalition, we are working to collaborate in order to shift our transportation system so that it addresses these environmental goals and boosts our individual and collective economic success and creates, sorry, that's my dog. And creates stronger communities. So this year, with the passage of the Vermont Climate Action Plan, the ongoing impacts of COVID-19, I'm sure you've heard this a million times already, but of course we have unprecedented incoming federal funding. And so we have a once in a lifetime opportunity to make significant progress towards this wide-ranging benefits that can come from a broader transportation system. So we have four kind of broad categories of policy priorities that we want to discuss today. So I'm going to hand it over to Rob to tell you about some of those recommendations to kick it off.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, members of the Senate Transportation Committee. I'm Rob Kidd with the Vermont Sierra Club. I'm the Conservation Program Manager, but as a member of the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, I am representing us today. And a lot of my work at the Sierra Club revolves around electric vehicles, so hence I'm taking the charge on this category for T4VT. I have a much more elaborate policy background on this issue, but I'm going to stick to the T4VT platform for right now. We may be able to get more detail later on. But just according with us at T4VT, the transition to electric vehicles must be rapidly accelerated to reduce carbon emissions and avoid the most dire effects of climate disruptions. A few years ago, I sat down on the committee to look at expanding public transit access. And one of the questions I kept asking that committee is, well, what about climate change? And everybody on that committee referred to me, if you want to address climate change around transportation, you're going to have to electrify your transportation and get people out of personalized vehicles into electric vehicles. So that's really critical to make sure we're reaching our climate goals is by the transitioning to electric vehicles. But to do so, EVs must be as financially and logistically accessible as possible. Funding for EV purchase incentives, vehicle replacement programs, and EV charging station grant programs must be increased to better serve low-income and BIPOC Vermonters. That's one of those things is you've all created some very good programs to replace your ride. Last year, the Mileage Smart program to help different people get into electric vehicles, and that's something we need to. But also, we got to consider about the charging station, about how we're accessing those. You did it as well last year with the multi-unit dwellings, but even we got to expand to it. Where do Vermonters spend most of their day? At work. So if we expand workplace charging, things like that, where people are going to be charging, we make sure we have greater access. Even myself, I currently live in a rental unit that does not have access to a charging. I'm moving in a month and in a couple of months, and the new house I'm moving to has an EV charging, so I'm excited to be able to charge while at home. So you have to be creative about how we proceed with that. Want to make sure that your current incentive programs are also expanded to allow municipalities, nonprofit organizations, and businesses to participate in transition vehicle fleets. I know you added some extra language in the last year in committee to allow rideshare programs to access those cars. We just they need to be out there being accessible. So hopefully you can expand that access to that. But also want to make sure that we're making sure these programs are sustainable, not just for the short term. So you're going to have to commit to long-term funding for these positions and align the budgets with our priorities. As you all know, you passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, and the Vermont Climate Action Council action plan calls for you to all to do a lot of things, a lot of programs to make sure that we're in line with reducing our goals. So, and we also are aware that your short-term funding challenge, well, actually long-term funding challenges are going to be realistic. So you're going to need dedicated funding for non-single-use vehicles and public transit infrastructure and initiatives. Vermont needs to continue to meet its social, environmental, and economic goals, not just in theory, but in the budgets. We also realize that the existing revenue streams are declining as projects with ever-increasing costs are demanded. New and innovative funding is needed. So we encourage you to think outside the box, try to find new ways to fund our program. A lot of us within the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, we're really hoping on the Transportation and Climate Initiative program to provide those fundings. We want to make sure that those are equitably introduced. So any type of program is making sure that those programs are helping those who are most impacted by changes in transportation mechanisms. We also make sure we're incorporating screens for state budgets, including the transportation bill, to help ensure funds are appropriate to support state climate and equity policy. Like I said earlier, it's not if we create a goal and requirements, but our transportation budget's going in the opposite direction, we ought to make sure that we're helping support these policies that we've all agreed to already. But also another thing is we must disincentive high emission vehicles and incentivize those with low emissions by implementing a new vehicle efficiency price adjuster. Those programs, I know Senator Perchick, you've introduced some ideas around that, and Senator Mark McDonald had introduced a bill to move forward that. There's discussion in the House transportation bill that will maybe create that program, but you're going to need dedicated funding to find ways to transition. So we're hoping that these are not just policies that are short-term, but are long-term solutions. And we look forward to working with you to develop those programs. So at this point, I'm going to refer it back to Katie unless anybody has any immediate questions.
Any questions from Rob at this time?
Yeah.
Go right ahead, Senator Ingles.
So Rob, you raised some very, very great points, and I've heard Senator McDonald's proposals and stuff. But so I got a challenge for you to get rid of those vehicles that have don't get as good a mileage and all that. Put your funding and put all your efforts up into the areas first that have those vehicles that don't have the options of electric vehicles or can't afford electric vehicles or don't have any type of mass transit. They have no way of getting around other than to buy these vehicles that they can afford that don't have the gas mileage that you're looking for. So, a country is only as good as the slowest moving part that you have. So instead of taking the low-hanging fruit, take the tough approach and put your resources and your efforts into these areas of the people that need it the most. And that's what my challenge would be to you, to every time that you look at a solution, put it into the area that would really need it first. I think you'd get there quicker.
Thank you for your comments, Senator Ingles. And yeah, it's something I think I agree with you is, yeah, we had to create these programs. And that's what I think some of the work that you've all done already with the Replace Your Ride program and the Mileage Smart program. How do we get these programs functional to help the people so they're not left behind in the cold, stuck with no transportation system? We need to move together with all these policies and not one single solution. So if we move together and make sure we have the elevation of those who are most impacted by these solutions, I think we can move forward. So I encourage you to strengthen those support programs. Then while we move through these programs to disincentivize purchasing of new, highly inefficient vehicles.
Further questions, comments, anybody? Okay, Rob, you want to turn it over? Or yes, Senator
Yeah, I'll
Kitchell.
turn it over to unless Senator Kitchell.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, a concern I have to express as chair of the budget, we have so many competing funding needs, and it's the general theme is what government more can do. And I just want to stress that this has got to be more than the puny little state of Vermont government with 640,000 people and what we can do. Now, the federal money gives us great opportunities, and we're hoping to apply those funds and move some significant steps forward, particularly in the area of getting the charging network robust and supporting that transition. I think we've struggled to make sure with finite resources that we are targeting them to the group of Vermonters who don't have the economic capacity. But I will tell you, a lot of people who do have the economic capacity still would like government to give them some incentive. And in the past, the federal incentives have helped higher income people because they've been in the form of tax credits. And you got to have a tax liability to take advantage. And if you're really of more limited income, that tax credit doesn't help you. So that's why we've tried very hard to be strategic, because the funding over the long haul to make this transition is limited. And one of the things that I just need to say is it's going to take the collective effort. And for people who have the economic means and a concern, I think we do need to make it clear that they have to help participate, and they have to make their own purchasing decisions in a way that advances us toward the future. That simply, expanded subsidies or incentives are there's limits to that, because they're competing with other environmental needs, like our water quality initiative, or helping more households with weatherization, which is beneficial because it helps reduce their energy cost burden, or upgrading the grid. And we have obviously financing requests from the utilities around that. So the only point I've got to make is how to make sure that this discussion is broader, and that it's not just state government and what state government can do for you, so to speak, but how to recognize, and Senator Ingles is, in today's parlance, is really economic justice and being strategic. And that's what we've done in the T-bill in past years by the mileage smart and working through that in that approach. So I just want to make that statement around how we make choices and what we set for expectations and how we create that collective responsibility.
I think you just effectively have said walking the talk, Senator Kitchell, which I appreciate.
Yes. Senator Mazza, can I follow up just on that?
Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with that. We have to have across the board. It's not just one person's going to be paying. It's going to be across the board around the thing, around the state. The Sierra Club, we've been very active about promoting electrification of vehicles. And if you see, actually, my background is from a Drive Electric Week event that we did, Sierra Club did before the pandemic. And Senator Perchick showed up with before I think you had your electric vehicle, electric Mustang. I know this last year we did one, and you came with yours. But we've been trying to get out there and making sure people realize the benefits of electrification. There's a lot more than we're just talking about. The initial cost of a vehicle is one of the biggest disincentives. But if you look at the current cost of an electric vehicle, it depends on the rate you have, but I've given the number about $1.80 equivalent per power than it would be for the gasoline, which is I think now $3.50. I'm not sure. I don't purchase gas that much.
$3.69 yesterday.
$3.69. Thank you, Senator. But you see that kind of initial cost. So we have to kind of help people get into that initial upfront cost, lower the cost, but even still, the Union of Concerned Scientists did a couple studies on this particular issue about how it can help rural economies grow because of keeping the electricity generated within state, keeping dollars in the state. It depends on which number you're looking at, but if you're purchasing electricity, 60 cents to 70 cents, somewhere in that range, stays within the state of Vermont. But if you're purchasing on fossil fuels, around 80 cents of every dollar leaves the state of Vermont. So do we want to keep money here and help grow our economy, or do we want to go off and funding other sources? So this is something that we need to think about as a holistic approach and not leave people behind. And that's why I've encouraged you supporting all those other programs like Replace Ride Mileage Smart. So we're helping people move so they're not left out in the cold, particularly in like places like Senator Ingles, your district, the Northeast Kingdom, where there is no public transit access. There is in Chittenden County and Senator Chittenden's district, but in other places, even in Montpelier, we have the My Ride program, which is expanding. And I know you're going to be continuing efforts on that. But I think Katie has a whole line of other things about their priorities. But I just wanted to open up around the EV so we didn't get lost on that comment. But I'll still stick around for any further follow-up conversations.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
That's fine. Thank you. Katie?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So gonna touch on the two other kind of broad categories that we have. The first is expanding transportation options. to reduce our dependence on single occupancy vehicles to better serve all Vermonters and their various needs. So as we just touched on, even EVs aren't going to solve all of our problems. So there's many other solutions. And as we know, we're at this point where we really need to make substantial investments in order to increase our multimodal mobility options. And I think a big part of this is providing this funding and technical support for regions and municipalities to be able to find the solutions that work best for their own communities and move forward local actions. So I'm not going to go into all of the policy recommendations that we have in this area because there's a lot here, but just to touch on a couple key points. The first is we need further investments in our active transportation infrastructure. So this is bike lanes, sidewalks, et cetera. Maintaining and expanding this infrastructure is really critical. We know that walking and biking remains at only about 1.5% of VTrans's annual budget. So this is certainly an area that could be expanded, but it's also, I think, a really smart use of our incoming federal infrastructure funds. And an area where financial and technical support for municipalities to be able to do that work to identify infrastructure priorities and carry those projects forward is really critical. The second point, as we look to, again, our more rural communities that have generally less transportation options, we need to make the transportation alternatives that are possible as easy and as accessible as possible for folks to be able to and want to use those alternatives. So we need to invest in our shared mobility. So this is talking about public transit, but also things like micro transit. So like Rob mentioned, My Ride in Montpelier is an example of a micro transit program. Car sharing, carpooling, all of these are options that we have on the table. T for VT supports making fare-free transit permanent to the extent possible. We know that it not only reduces the financial burden on those who rely on transit, but it can also optimize service and help to rebuild ridership at this point in time that we know is suffering a bit. Supporting workforce development, which I believe the committee has heard a bit about already, is really key to avoiding reductions in service and those inconsistencies that can really hurt ridership. Again, funding innovative efforts like My Ride in Montpelier, expanding those to other communities will help to improve things like first and last mile challenges, which can be a big issue in our more rural communities, places that are less dense. And of course, we recognize that all of these recommendations need to be funded. So we encourage the committee to look at the sustainable funding options that were recommended in the 2021 transit funding study that was put out by CCRPC and Green Mountain Transit. Another key policy recommendation for us is requiring large employers to integrate transportation demand management, TDM planning programs. We think this is a really useful tool that we have. Employer-supported options like supporting telecommuting, carpooling. These are easy and generally low or no cost options and solutions for employers to help support their employees. We also have the successful Mobility and Transportation Innovations Grant Program. This has done a really fantastic job at supporting a lot of these innovative programs, and we support increasing funding for this program in the next fiscal year to continue to incentivize these innovative strategies. And finally, we support taking advantage of our existing rail infrastructure. It's there. We should continue to plan for and invest in improvements in order to increase commuter, long distance passenger and commercial rail use. And then the final category that I want to touch on is supporting our downtowns and villages. We know that land use is a really critical component to the overall transportation system. our compact community centers, where we have housing and jobs, services, schools, more closely tied together, allows for greater population density, which means that we have greater transportation options. So we can have things like public transit, walk bike infrastructure, EV charging stations, and reduced energy usage overall. So supporting smart growth development in our compact land settlements, these are all things that can help transportation more broadly and should really be a part of this broader conversation. So helping to provide, again, financial and technical support for our state designated downtowns and village centers, including supporting their ability to implement and strengthen our complete streets policies. Another key component here is the Vermont State Road Design Standards, which are really long overdue to be updated in order to ensure our complete streets and the safe accommodation of all users of our roads. VTrans should fund and commit to completing the update as detailed in their 2015 work plan. And I would recommend here that you could hear from our coalition partners at AARP Vermont and Local Motion, as they've been really key proponents and have a lot of knowledge about how to best strengthen our complete streets policies and the Vermont state standards. So I will leave it there. Rob and I are happy to answer any questions, but I also want to note that any of our other coalition members are also available to answer questions or provide future testimony if helpful. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you again.
Questions for Kim? Katie?
Yes.
Yes, go right ahead.
So thank you for this presentation, and I support everything I'm seeing here. I think what the answer is, what needs to be part of the answer, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on these far-fetched notions I've brought up multiple times in this committee, but I think needs to be part of the discussion as we plan out the next 5 to 10 years, is using economic incentive to align with our sustainable objectives. Where am I going with that? I think we need to assess usage of our roadways based on how much somebody or a vehicle actually uses our roads. And that way you can economically penalize them the more they use single occupancy vehicles, while still subsidizing for the lowest income officials. I would simultaneously, to connect with your downtown villages and compact community centers, a notion that I've heard explored in different areas, but tax parking spots. So if an employer is going to have a certain amount of parking spots, that's encouraging single occupancy vehicles. And their alternative would be to either have to pay a certain amount for the number of parking spots for their employees that they require to be on site, or alternatively, they can subscribe to some of those transportation demand management systems, which will motivate more people to get out of their vehicles. I know those have all sorts of implications that people would get against, but I would love to see advocacy groups like you start to look for rational assessment methodologies. And I know Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg is exploring and open to use-based assessment on a federal level, especially as we have electric vehicles no longer paying the gas tax. I think it needs to be part of the discussion in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about how economic taxation, tolls for use of our roadways and parking might be part of the discussions that you're looking at to achieve some of these goals, while generating revenues to fund more buses and to fund also the roads that electric cars need to be safe, paved, and also maintained.
I can take a first stab at that, and Rob, if you have anything to add on, please do. But thank you, Senator Chin, for that question. I think you're absolutely right. And in large part, in my understanding, a lot of those questions do come down to a municipality or a region being able to implement some of those practices. And I think that we should, if not encourage, make sure that our municipalities know about those options that exist for them. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier, that with the fact that we have generally small and rural communities, we understand that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for our state. So the extent to which we can work with our regions and municipalities to find the solutions that work best for them, I think is really critical for our success. And in terms of the use-based assessment, I don't have as much familiarity with that, and we haven't talked about it as a coalition. But I think it's definitely, you know, another tool in the tool belt that we should be examining. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. Rob, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah. Actually, based on the way your current budget's going to be happening over the next couple of years, this is serious questions that you need to address, and we all need to come up solutions. But it's really important. We have an opportunity right now with all the federal money coming in to invest in these processes that we see as a vision to make sure we're not leaving people left behind while we transition. Because the way the marketplace is, we are going to electrification of cars, but we need to strengthen all the bicycle programs. We need to strengthen our complete street policies, so that way, when we are down to this budget crisis, we've already made a lot of these critical investments for the future. But like, it doesn't take away from the hard work of like, how are we going to pay for all these things in years out? So, you know, creating innovative ideas. I know you kind of plenty of them, Senator Chittenden, but even like, you know, we looked at TCIP as possibly a solution to bring in revenues. We looked at other programs, even the vehicle efficiency price adjustment program. We have to kind of explore those options but remember, while we're implementing, making sure they're equitable, so we're not penalizing those who can't afford it in the first place.
One of the things that's always got my notice is that the fact that a lot of folks would like to park their cars, but if they work, Chittenden County draws a lot of outsiders, St. Albans, they draw from Middlebury, and these folks have to come to work, and they don't have the convenience of public transportation. I mean, when you have a job that's 7 to 3 or whatever it is, you got to have that transportation. So it's very difficult. I know we're doing better. We're doing very well, better, but areas don't have that availability of any other way than drive their own vehicle. And you brought up, Rob, something about the cost versus a gallon of gasoline. Was that cost figured on the rate of electricity without any profits or fees or anything on it? I think you said $1.68 or something.
Yeah, the number changes from time to time, but I've seen it's about between $1.70, $1.80 would be the equivalent power per gallon than it would be at the pump. Now, it's going to range between the different vehicles. So if you have a purely electric SUV and it's heavier, it's going to be not as efficient as a larger
but to get that base, there's no upcharge then. There's no tax, and there's no federal tax, there's no local tax, there's no profit, whoever's putting those stations in. Is that correct?
I mean, there is tax on your electricity.
Yeah, but how about like a federal gas tax to replace that, or a state tax?
Right. Well, I mean, that's something you're going to have to explore down the future. I know you looked into it, the special rate tariff last year that you all were looking at. But as far as I'm under the impression, the infrastructure is not really there for us to implement something like that. Right. And we've had successive public utilities commissions, agency of transportation, who stated basically it's not worth the time to put any particular fees on electric vehicles until we reach 15% of the market share.
Right.
You know, and so we're trying to keep that away because we want to incentivize people getting into electric vehicles. So putting any extra fees are going to be challenging at this time while we're trying to move forward with that.
But there will come a day when those fees have to be added. I mean,
oh yeah, I mean, we're going to have to create new ideas or maybe move away from the gas tax idea. I know feds are looking at vehicle miles traveled or increased registration fees.
Yeah. Any questions, comments, anybody?
Yes, Senator Mazza.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Hey, Rob, I hear you say that I'm just going to backtrack. I think that we just need to get back to what Senator Kitchell said, is that if people really believe in this, that they're going to support it themselves. I mean, I hear all these things that we need to incentivize, or we need to punish, or we need to force people. We need to do all these things to get people to believe that this is the way that things are going. And I just don't think that's the way that the public really wants to be handled. If this is really what people believe in, then they'll do it. This thing of forcing and penalizing and taxing and charging for parking spots, or forcing businesses to come up with plans to get their people to carpool and all that. I mean, people have options. Businesses have options. They can move out of state. They can choose not to participate. They can do all kinds of things. And I just think that if it's really what people want to do, they're going to do it. And this coercion of twisting people's arms to make them do things they don't want to do, I don't know if that's the right strategy.
Yeah, Senator Ingles, I hear your concern on that, and I take on it is government elected officials represent the public in some of these more difficult decisions about how we move forward as a state. So it's you're all elected.
But we are the government.
Right, you are the government,
right?
And
Right.
some of these, I've studied electric vehicle policy and looked at it. Now, you talk to my neighbor who has no idea about the different benefits. They don't understand the situation. So we have to kind of dive down into the policies, even like the transportation budget shortfall that you're going to be facing in the next couple of years. You ask 95% of Vermonters, they're going to have no idea that there's going to be a transportation budget shortfall that you're facing. So these are the difficult policy decisions you all as elected officials will have to wrestle with while we're moving forward. And I'm in the belief that government can do good. And if we set us on a course to address our climate goals, our equity goals, we can make a difference and make it better for everybody instead of allowing people to be faced with an economy in 10 years that there are no internal combustion engines because we are transitioning that way.
I'd rather go put my arm around my neighbor and tell them about all the good benefits of, other than pounding them in the head with a hammer. But that's the difference, I guess.
I try both. Thanks.
Senator Ingles, I hear your counterpoints on the toll and the penalties and all that. I would instead frame it as the following. It's just rational assessment. The gas tax is rational assessment. When you buy some gas, you pay a tax which pays for the roads. And that's what I'm looking for, is rational assessment to pay for these really expensive roads as we electrify our vehicles. That's why I'm a proponent of use-based assessment through the form of tolls. Now, it's not saying I want to penalize people, but there is an economic incentive that might motivate people to carpool if they can avoid or better extend the dollar of their tolls that they might pay to use the roadways. But I hear you, the wording matters, and maybe I used the wrong words with penalties.
Well, and I get what you're saying, Senator Chittenden, but when we have a problem of people not showing up to work already, and now they pull into their job site, and now that company is going to be forced to tax them for their parking spot or have a meter on there that for every hour they park there, they got to pay. They're not showing up. I mean, they're going to just stay home. And we have to look at what the overall benefit is as a state is, okay, can people afford to live here? Can they afford to come and have a living and live the dream? Or do they move elsewhere? And that's what I'm worried about.
Quick follow-up, if I may.
Yes, go right ahead.
I meant to just frame it as that if we're serious about driving more compact development, that's we're looking at how we have parking spaces facilitating longer commutes, greater distances, less public transit, less density, and it might be better land use as well. So I put it forward, taxing parking spots, because I've heard that expressed in different ways as a way to possibly achieve some of those goals if we're serious about also our carbon footprint and getting people out of single occupancy vehicles. But I'm not introducing a bill to do so, Senator Ingles. I just would love to hear these advocacy groups inform me about what's happening in that regard across the country, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and if there's a possible middle ground, something to explore, at least to consider in these discussions, and nothing on the short term. So Rob's response to my statement was very short term. I agree. That's what we got to do. We got to address. I'm thinking 5, 10, 20 years out as we electrify our vehicles. I think we need to be thinking about these larger scale solutions.
Well, if you want to work out at my store, it's free parking.
I'm coming.
Gotta have a little humor here this morning.
And of course, the food is free too.
Yeah, food is free too. That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe a day old, but all right. Yeah.
And I just want to say, I'm just saying we're all in it together, and
Exactly.
Vermonters have different economic capacity to contribute. And so that's really what I am saying, that we need to be conscious as we're looking at how we allocate money and how we support these policies. I think the track record is pretty good in transportation, and we really do need to think about our old revenue base and gasoline tax as our major funding source. We know it's going to be transformed, and we've got to deal with that. The best way to do it, I think, is what Senator Chittenden is talking about, whether we base it on actual miles traveled. Sometimes people who are poor also have the longest commute. I don't know, that would argue to put it on the registration, which then equalizes the cost more. So those are the kinds of policy, choices that are ahead of us. So that was really the thrust of my comment. Is we've got to look at it on all levels: local, personal, state, and then ultimately national will influence it as well.
And I agree with that, and I agree that the gas taxes work fine. I really do that, and I agree with that very, very much so. But the thought of forcing people in a direction that they don't want to go in has never sat well with me, and so there's a lot more to be discussed. I just also believe that all great societies move as fast as their slowest one, and you can help them along. You can help them get there quicker, and I think that we're moving in the right direction. We're all trying to get there, but let's make it equitable for everyone. That's where I'm at.
Yes, go right ahead.
I just wanted to make sure that the committee knew that under Ms. Gallagher's name on the website is their written testimony, because there's a lot of bullet points in there that they ran through, but it's great to receive them all, especially as we think about the T-bill and different aspects that we want to put in there, or what the House is working on. And I agree with Senator Ingles' second point there about focusing on the slowest gears of our society and making sure those are greased to move faster. I didn't hear anything about forcing anybody, but incentivizing to meet the needs. Kind of what Senator Chittenden talks about is, let's tax the bads and promote the goods. We don't want to force anybody to do anything they don't want to do, but if we have goals as a community or as a state, we want to try to get to those goals. But I agree, we don't want to be forcing anybody that doesn't want to do it. Like Senator Ingles said, if we can do it in a way where we just talk to our neighbors and wrap their arm around them and find a way to make it work for them, that's definitely the best way to do it. And I think that's what the Transportation for Vermonters is trying to do.
Any other questions? Comments? Anybody?
Oh, I've got to go. I'm sorry. Jeannie
I was
reminded
wondering,
me.
you're late already. Anything else? Yes, Katie, go right ahead.
Thank you. Just want to add one last comment, which just based on this conversation, I think one of the strengths of the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition is that we have a lot of diverse groups and opinions, and generally are trying to support individuals and families and all different sorts of folks to be able to have broader transportation options. And so I do hope that we're not, and I think if we had the ability to force people, that would speak more strongly to our strength than I think we actually have. But we're trying to provide greater options. So when we think about children walking to school, or our aging population being able to make it to the grocery store or to a doctor's appointment, these are all the types of folks that we're thinking of when we think about broadening our transportation options. So I just wanted to kind of put that plug in for, I hope that we're not making people, or I think at least that our priorities are not to make people do anything that they don't want to do, but to allow them greater opportunities to live their lives in a health and safe way and do what they need to do.
And let me redefine force. When you make it so expensive that the poorest people can't afford it, that is force.
Yes.
And they lose out on opportunity to be part of the bigger plan. And they very well want to be part of the solution and part of the problem. But when you make it too expensive and they can't be part of that, they're just not going to participate.
If I may, Senator Mazza.
Yes, go right ahead, Senator Chipman.
Completely agree, Senator Ingles. And that's why I'm a proponent of use-based assessment based on license plates, because you can income sensitize it. Same with car registrations. Those are state-run systems. And so you could basically, how much they pay in income taxes, you can adjust accordingly. And so that way we can, as you said, go far with everybody rather than leaving anybody behind. And that's why income sensitization comes into the play when you move away from the gas tax towards other revenue streams.
Okay. Anybody else? Rob, anything else you'd like to add?
Real
Yeah,
quick, Senator, are you okay, Senator Ingles, with the word cajole rather than force? Can I cajole?
I'll come put my arm around you, Senator Chittenden, and we'll be okay.
Be careful when you go to South Burlington, okay? Watch out. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate is I don't feel like we're forcing people. We're trying to help people move along in that direction, that a lot of people understand that we need to move forward. And we understand that climate change is real. We understand that there is dire impacts if we don't transition as a whole, not just in Vermont, throughout the country, throughout the globe. And Vermonters have always been out in front of things, and we've demonstrated to the world that we can change. So I think we have a very big part to show that a rural state like Vermont can transform, and we can support these programs as we modernize our transportation system and not leave people left behind. And that's not our goal. Like I said, I go out there and work with communities, talk with people about vehicle electrification. That's what some of our Drive Electric Week events have been all about. It's to show why these make sense, not just you have to do this. Come and join it. And everybody I've known who's driven an electric car has liked them afterwards. So that's what I just want to conclude with. But if we're going to meet our equity goals and our climate goals, we're going to have to move forward on these programs. And I understand the challenges you all are facing.
There's no surprise that nationwide, everybody's going to be struggling with the same issue. It is a major, major change, something that hasn't happened. Well, gasoline engines first came out, so it is a major change. There's a lot to look at, and it isn't just a Vermont issue. It's going to be national, because national is tied in with the gas tax, and state to state. Everybody wants to capture the tourist market naturally, and there's just a lot of issues that are a lot of good people working on this. But it's not easy. As I listen to it more and more, it's a very, very involved subject that's not going to be solved overnight. But we, as you said, Rob, we have to address the climate change, and we have to address how to pay for it, and because electric vehicles are here to stay. They're not going away. It's not a fad. They're going to grow. Like I said, a couple of years ago, we only had 3,000. Now it doesn't sound like much. We're up to 6,000, and it's going to be, 100,000 very soon. Not tomorrow, but General Motors is switching to 100% electric, and so the choices for gasoline are gone. They're going to be gone. You're going to have to go, and we just have to get prepared for it. So, but it's an issue that's very interesting. But yet, on the other hand, it's not just a Vermont problem. It's an issue that we have to make changes, because it's here to stay. It's not a fad. We started off with the hybrids, and now it's electricity, and every day there's some big obstacles, where to charge them, how often to charge the stations. As we spent a lot of time on charging stations, where to put them, how to pay for them, who's going to make any money on them, how to replace this and that. So it's an interesting subject, but I'm glad you folks are all working on it, because it's everybody plays a role in this issue, and So it's very good testimony. Any other questions or comments from anybody this morning? Anybody just pop up? I don't see everybody on the screen, so anything else you want to add, Rob, or anyone else?
No, I thank you. I appreciate the time you all are giving, and I understand the
good.
challenges you all
No.
face. So thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for coming. I appreciate all the input. That was very good testimony this morning. Very helpful. Thank you. Okay, Jeannie, I think unless there's someone else in the waiting room ready to speak, is anybody else, Jeannie, there?
No?
Okay,
You're
I guess
done.
you can take us off from live, please.